businesses today across the globe are being pulled in many, many directions. Investors and shareholders want the highest returns and the lowest risks. And many investors also want their investments to line up with their values. Employees want the best working conditions and the most benefits and the highest pay, and to work for companies that share their values. Consumers and business customers want the highest quality for the lowest cost, and products and services align with their values. Suppliers want the highest price and the best business partner. And in addition, being a good corporate citizen is more important than ever. So everybody has a different priority, right? And it's tough to be a leader today, or even a board member for that matter. And it's not, there's political wins, but it's not just political pressures, but they are added on top of it, making what may seem like normal everyday business decisions fraught, stressful, controversial, and crazy, right? In a word. So today we're going to find out how leaders can think about their decisions to accelerate progress while keeping their various stakeholders happy, taking care of the planet, at least most of the time. From a woman who has been one of those leaders and advising other leaders and boards for years. And she's also a woman I had the privilege of having on a panel I moderated at the Change Now Summit in Paris recently. So let's get started. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We're sharing stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and ESG-related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. We give career advice in every episode, especially at the end, but it's often sprinkled throughout our conversation if you listen closely enough. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes blog as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It helps other people find us. If you're struggling with your own career, especially in this insane economy, please reach out to me on Twitter or Threads or wherever and let me know. We can help you no matter what industry you're in. So the reality is that every industry has an impact on the planet, on climate change, and climate change has an impact on every industry and every stakeholder. They may not realize it, but they do. So how can leaders navigate this terrain? Let's ask my guest today. I'd like you to meet Isabelle Grosmaitre, founder and CEO of Goodness & Company consulting firm in Paris, France. I'm envious. I wish I was still in Paris. I had the good fortune to meet Isabelle recently when she was on one of the panels I moderated at the big Change Now Summit in Paris a few months ago. Isabelle has worked both in-house as a leader in driving purpose-driven change in consumer product companies such as Danone, and in marketing and research roles. She's also the author of the book Purpose-Led Companies, and how the next generation of leaders can really change the world. She is active in promoting purpose-led business on various committees, and we at Electric Ladies Podcast especially like that she is actively promoting women in leadership as vice president of the International Women's Forum in her region and as part of 100 Davos Women, a global community of impact-driven women leaders who I hope to find out more about. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Isabelle Grosmaitre to Electric Ladies Podcast. Welcome, Isabelle.
Thank you, Johan.
It's so wonderful to see you again, at least by video, right? So I want to start with finding out what you're hearing. So you're talking to companies, you're talking to executives, you're talking to boards. What are the priorities they're telling you about? What are they concerned about? What are they focusing on now?
So I think that time is now. We are at a tipping point when really business needs to reinvent themselves for better futures. In fact, I believe that they need to reinvent their model and even demonstrate their contribution to society. I believe, in fact, that only companies with a positive impact will thrive. Why? Because they will be chosen by people, by employees, as you said, by investors, by partners, by clients. This is what is happening right now. And the question is not anymore about the why. The question has become about the how. So in that sense, I believe, and I've worked a lot in the role of board, and getting your board on board, as we discussed together in Paris, is becoming critical.
So I've 12 questions at least from that. But when you say it's not about the why anymore, it's about the how, drill down on that a little bit for me, because in the US, it's still about the why. I mean, it goes up and down, right? I mean, the reality is, as I like to say, the train has left the station. The corporate sector, the business sector is already doing this work, and people are cashing the checks. I mean, even the Republicans in the US that voted against this stuff are lining up for the ribbon countings, right? For the money that they voted against getting. So there is somewhat of a discussion about the why here, but there's also the doingness part. So talk about why. It's in your experience with your clients, it's just immediately shifted into the how, and that making the case is no longer an issue.
So we serve leaders on a mission, and we operate around the world. We have clients also in the US. The reality is that conscious leaders are becoming a movement, not a niche anymore. So we focus our energy to serve those leaders on a mission, really eager to shift purpose into practice. Of course, as you say, Johan, there are some leaders that are not ready, but I think that I want to focus myself on leaders that are ready and that are eager to make the shift happen, because there is no magic wand, but there are ways to really shift purpose into practice. And I want to serve those courageous leaders to make the shift happen.
Okay, that's cool. So, and I want to get into boards in a second, but you sent me a recent study, which was interesting for a lot of reasons. One was it's the longest run and one of the longest running surveys of its kind, by GlobeScan and the Sustainability Institute. They've been doing this for 25 years, they said. And they surveyed over 500 sustainability professionals across 63 countries. Now, obviously, it's sustainability professionals, so there's an instant kind of screen there, right? But it found that sustainability is increasingly considered an integral part of business strategy by business leaders. Two interesting findings caught my eye that I wanted to talk to you about. One is they said that the legislation in different countries have different legislation, and the disclosure frameworks are actually driving agendas. So talk about that for a minute. Do you find that? Is that because they're mandatory, or what is how? Because a lot of times you can just kind of, do the bare minimum or ignore it or fight against it.
So I think we need both, actually. We need no one can achieve the change that we need alone. That's for sure. Whoever you are, whatever company you are, whatever country, we need one another. That's for sure. And the reality is that I think we also need regulation. We need regulation to really force companies to act for a positive impact. And we also need regulation to encourage the ones that are at the forefront. It's about competitive edge. So I think we need one another. My perspective and our work has always been and will always be to really serve the ones that are at the forefront, the pioneer companies of the world. So if you're referring to the GlobeScan study, which really highlights some companies that we are very close to, I think that those companies did not wait for regulations to happen. So I think that they are also moving the needle. They are showing the way for how really you can really embrace positive impact at the core of the business model. It means that sustainability is not anymore, a sustainability expert's business. It has become everyone's business. And in fact, those companies that are at the forefront, like Unilever, Mars, Patagonia, Nestle, IKEA, Natura & Co, and others. Some are, purpose-led companies, some are B Corp, whatever. I think that what is critical is that they are showing the way that sustainability has become a competitive edge, really.
Oh, I love that. Sustainability as a competitive edge. Yeah, I believe that too. And I think that's especially important in the US too, with the Inflation Reduction Act, where you literally cannot compete for that money if you don't have a sustainability bona fide, verified
Mhm.
sustainability profile. But you said something interesting. You said that, and the study found this too, that it's actually being integrated and changing business models. Give me an example of a company or a situation or a division of a company where they actually changed the business model in order to be more sustainable.
Mhm. So I think that it's about really reinventing really the model, and I can find you different aspects of it. So it's really about defining your purpose as a company, meaning your contribution to the world, just going beyond profit. Why does a company exist? And here for that, I think that we all are aware of Patagonia, they exist to save our home planet. I think it's very fair, very courageous, ambitious, a little bold, must I say, and they are acting on this purpose. Another way is about reinventing performance model. The reality is that if you always look at performance, the way we used to look at it as a regular P&L, it doesn't fly, it doesn't work. So here I can share with you the example of L'Oréal, really shifting the role of finance towards chief value creation officer. How do you reinvent performance? How do you really guide business leaders and in their decision, in their investment planning, into the contribution of the brands, not just on profit or regular financial performance, but also performance that are key for the people, the planet, and people around them. That's another example that I can strive. I can share with you also the example of Unilever. That was one of the first one, many years ago with Paul Polman, but now afterwards with Alan Job. They don't have a sustainability plan and then a business plan. No, they have one in all. Their transformation strategy is about making their business a more sustainable business. And that's also the case for, I don't know how much you were talking about the US Mars, Mars company. They have been putting in place a compass, a very bright way to look at things, where they're looking at 4 dimensions. Of course, financial performance, but also quality of growth. Are you growing in categories of products that are good for people and planet or not? They are looking at what we would call their positive impact, number of beneficiaries, etc., but also about the trust they create with their employees and with their stakeholders. These are new ways to do business. Or I also can share, of course, the example that I led, which is Danone, One Planet, One Health, because I used to be the catalyst of Danone. It's really about also harnessing the power of people around you, because the reality is that it's not a business as usual transformation. You need to shift the way you operate. And I really, with our experience, I can see really the major difference between companies that succeed versus the other ones that are failure. The big difference is their ability to harness the power of people around them. How much are they engaging employees, partners, clients in the process to achieve this genuine transformation? And for that, for instance, at Danone, what we put in place is that we have 100,000 employees, so what we would call Danoners. Twice a year, we would ask all of them on the 9 strategic priorities of the company, what was the most urgent, the most important priority for them, and also their inputs. 86,000 of them did contribute. And then we would reiterate our strategy. That's a major way, a major shift, in the way you operate, shifting purpose into practice. Of course, it's about the vision. There is not 2. It's one vision about how do you embrace sustainability in business. It's about moving from words to action at the core of the operating model, not the side. It's becoming everyone's business. And you can only do that by harnessing the power of people. This is our experience on this one.
That's great. That's all brilliant, actually. It's interesting because if people, these union strikes that are going on really point this out. If you don't have people, if you don't have a business, it doesn't matter how profitable you are, right? By the way, I was just with the CEO of Patagonia in Aspen, and I said, Ryan, I'm sorry, I only interview women, so you have to find me a woman. So I'm going to interview one. I think it's the president. He's the CEO. I think that's the president.
Yes.
He's going to have me interview. But yeah, they're a different model because they're not public. They're very private. They're a B Corp. They do their own thing, right? They don't have to answer to the typical shareholders. But you mentioned people, so I want to jump to that for a second and then come back to the model. But engaging people is so critical, and so many companies get this wrong. They either misread the people, they assume that all they want is the money and the recognition, but they don't really understand their people. So how do you help, or how do you suggest that companies get a better understanding of who it is they're dealing with, who their employees really are from a value standpoint? What makes them tick? I mean, even surveys don't always really tell you, because they tell you what they want, they think you want to hear. So how do you engage those 100,000 people, and how do you really have them become cheerleaders for this new model? And because in some cases they may get less of a bonus, for example.
I think it's all about governance. So we are entering actually this new era of governance. And I believe the only way to succeed is to build a more collaborative and inclusive governance. So I think there are many levels, and we'll go back to the board because they are critical. But to answer your point, more collaborative governance cannot only come one way. So it's not just about employees. It's not just about the board. It's not just about the stakeholders. It's not just about the clients. They need to work all together. And this is the big shift happening. So if you are asking me about the employees, I think it's a little mix of different elements. So one is to mobilize 100% of them to make their voice heard, to let them know that their voice, their perspective, their point of view matters. And this was the example of Danone. The other element is that we are building more and more like a next generation committee, promotion of next generation committee. Aside, it's not the shadow COMEX, not the shadow EXCO as it used to be, because this doesn't really work. But it's really about the next generation of committee, which is really here to challenge the leadership team, but also to get things done, to be able to be change makers and to get things done in a time frame that is different than the regular governance. That's for employees as one of the elements. And it's also about highlighting the fact that employees are the change makers in the process, along the way. So making sure that every time you are engaging, in a town hall or in different, participation events, you always bring along young leaders in your role. But it's also true for clients. It's also true for your partners. We see so many sustainability committees from the past that were only experts, experts among themselves. And, they know what needs to be done. But the reality is that we need people that are in the business, that are with us, to collaborate together. So if you're in the consumer goods industry, is that, can you set up a more collaborative approach with retailers, for instance? So it's moving from a transactional only to a more collaborative approach with your partners, such as retailers, to make the shift happen and to shift also the way you operate in business. That's another example. But I think that it goes beyond your employees. And then I hope we'll go back to the board, because I think the board plays a critical role.
Yeah, and that's where I want to go next. Absolutely. But I want to make sure, because so many organizations, it just always frustrates me in my years in corporate America and as a consultant, when they say, oh, I know my market, I know my people. And it's like, no, obviously no. So let's talk about
them. It's a very different story. If you know somebody, it's a very different story. And we all know that in life, to engage one another,
yes,
Because the reality is that it's also a challenge. Let's face it, it's not so easy to make the shift happen, to reinvent performance, to reinvent models of companies. So we need one another, and therefore we will go further together. That's as simple as that.
Absolutely. And everybody has to give and take, because the change affects every party in that negotiation, and you have to weigh the pros and cons along the way, right? So one of those players, as we've talked about, is the board, and we were on this, you were kind enough to be on a panel with me, and speaking multi-generational, we had that component as well. Clover is glorious. So talk to me about the role of boards and how you have found what are the most effective ways you have found to get the board on board for this kind of systemic change, because they really see themselves as representing the shareholders. Mm-hmm. They don't always see themselves representing all the stakeholders, right? They see themselves representing the shareholders. And a lot of times you have activist investors of one stripe or another on the board, or you have just a representative of the largest shareholder who's always screaming and yelling, return on investment and stock price. And what always helps, the stock price doesn't always help the people and the purpose and all the values that we're talking about, right? And also, they're thinking very short term. I mean, they have to report earnings every quarter, and saving the planet doesn't happen quarter by quarter, right? And you have to make investments, and you might not see the return for a few years. So how have you found to get the board to support these initiatives? And frankly, what kinds of objections have you found the board raised? And, how do you answer them?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Joanne. So I think that it's a topic that is very close to my heart. So why? Because I'm really eager to serve leaders on a mission. And I've actually built one of the movements that I'm involved in. So, I'm involved in several movements as steward of Before Good Leaders, in the 100 Davos Women, as you said, and many others. One of them that I've co-founded called Generation Glasgow with my two allies, Qantas and Boson. And the reality is that we have built a movement of 34 leaders around the world that are really eager to shift purpose into practice. And our intention was really to unlock the barriers of change. So, you go and you have those interaction with them. You try to understand really how we could help, etc. And the reality is that there was a common, unanimous thinking was that the biggest roadblock on their journey was the role of the board. Huh. So I was actually surprised that it was that high on the agenda. So I understand that we are entering a new era in terms of governance. We are all aware that board is playing a critical role in, they are the steward actually of sustainable performance, right? So we have those numbers in mind. The 91% of the directors are really eager to embrace ESG, but the reality is that more than half of them recognize already today that they are not doing efficient work on this scheme. So we went and we interviewed several board members around the world to understand what is holding them back. They're conscious, they want to go there. So what is holding them back? And are there ways that we could move the needle together? So maybe there are three things that I could share with you. The first one is related to diversity. Why? The diversity of the board's members themselves. Why? Because most of the time, how does it work? You choose your board members because they are experimented leaders that, have track records, amazing track records, and therefore, they are respected, knowledgeable as far as running business, for sure. But as we discussed previously, Johan, that we need to reinvent models. So they have not, reinvented their models. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So how can we welcome diversity in the boards to be able to reinvent models? As you said, we are in a shareholder economy, but we need to move to a stakeholder economy. So what does it mean? And actually, 57% of the board members recognize today that the lack of diversity is an issue in the board. And when we say that, it's, it's welcoming people that are more conscious about sustainable business or sustainability, what it takes, not just captains of industry that already have done it, in the regular business as usual mode, but maybe also welcoming, of course, I'm very eager on that, women at the board. I'm very happy that France is one of the leading markets, thanks to many regulations that enable us to have today, for the biggest company, 43% of women sitting at the board. I think it plays a critical role. But also there are discussions about the next generation eager to drive this change. So I think it's about welcoming people with different lenses, people that are able to look with the lenses of business as a force for good, and having it's all about people. So if you have the right collective around the table, you have a better chance to succeed. That's the first element.
Yeah, I just want to toss in there that it's also diversity of industry experience and diversity of trajectory. They tend to go for, their model is CEO and CFO, right, or COO. And the reality is that women and younger people, or younger than the traditional board member is, have a different career path and have a different, and they jump around industries. They're not just doing the organization man, trajectory, and you need that different experience too.
Definitely. So that's the first element. The second element, it will not surprise you, Johan, is that I believe that sustainability, you need to look at it from a competitive edge perspective. It's not about the checking the box, about the compliance, the what needs to be done. You're making sure that you have a relevant, you measure things, that you have KPIs, trajectory in place. No, it's really about the building the competitive edge. How can you be preferred because you are doing good? So it's really about involving your brands, involving, your suppliers in a different way. How do you reinvent the value chain with your suppliers? How can you help them and build this competitive edge that suppliers will also choose you and you choose them? It's both way. It's the point that I was telling you about the clients or the retailers in the consumer goods industry or in several industries. It's how can you think about it from a business perspective, a competitive edge perspective. And this requires a whole different approach also at the board, because it's not the one thing that you cross-check once a year, because you have the sustainability committee coming and just making sure that it's all in the good shape in regards to your past. No, it's really about putting it in the agenda, at the core of the agenda, and thinking about how, in 5 years, in 10 years from now, because you're building the legacy of the company, how do you make this happen at the core of business?
Yeah, and I just, I'll add quick to that is, I believe that the regulatory push can be a nudge for the naysayers who say, who try to sideline the sustainability initiatives. Well, at least the compliance part can push them to go, well, we have to do this. So, we don't have a choice.
No, for sure. But you're not asking the same question to the board if you are taking it from a compliance perspective or if you're taking it from a competitive perspective.
Exactly.
So
Absolutely.
You're asking the right question, right?
Absolutely. I'm thinking of the objections, because there's always going to be diversity means you're going to have people who disagree, right? So. Of
course. But it's more about, if you think about competitive advantage, you screen your portfolio of brands or of products according to how much they are good to the people and planet. You don't just look at it from a financial perspective. It's very different. And then you don't make the same choice.
Yes, your criteria for making choices is different. Absolutely.
And then the third thing that I believe is critical, what we have found in our study, so the first one is diversity, the second one is the point related to competitive edge, and the last one is around the standardization, if I may, of the accountability. A lot of times in the board, you have the Mr. or Mrs. Sustainability hat, where, it's her or it's his responsibility. No, The reality is that it needs to be everyone's business. It needs to be everyone's accountability. That's a big shift. Progress has been made, right? Regulation is coming. The ISSB last week, will help for sure. In Europe, there are major regulations that are really pushing the needle big time to, for smaller companies. It's not just the one that are the biggest one, the biggest responsibility. It's become everyone's business. But the reality is that today there's still little incentives related to sustainability. How can we also, and this is maybe too far, but how can we invent an incentive scheme that works for the board members to encourage them to work in the right direction, not just, from a shareholder perspective, short term, as you say. So we need to reinvent something here.
Oh, I love that. In some ways, at least in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act is doing some of that, and also in Europe, it's global, of course. The IFRS new standards kind of do that. I think that's where regulation and the frameworks become the nudge.
Yes.
They force people who don't want to think differently to think differently, and that bring in other voices, and that helps drive a new business model.
Yeah. You're right. It's for me an interesting sparkle at the board, because they're starting to realize that this is coming, and this is also good news for all of us.
Well, and the reality is they're all smart, experienced people, and so if you can get them over that hump, that's why I asked you about the objections, because if you can get them over that hump of the objections, then they start thinking about what would we have to do to get there?
Yes, for sure.
Right.
But the reality is that in regards to objection, it depends what type of objections. But the reality is that, of course, not everyone will become a B Corp as Patagonia or a purpose-led company or whatever. But the reality is that whether you are big or small, whether you are in one type of industry or another one, what is coming, and you have no other choice. So you can be reactive, or you can decide to take your own path and to have the courage to, be proactive and to do what's right.
Exactly. And you can lead, follow, or get out of the way, basically, in my view. So I want to ask you one other thing, and then get some career advice for mid-career women. But before we get to that, speaking of all of this, we do live in a bifurcated environment on these issues today. And especially in the US, you have, on one hand, you have the leaders who are more and more being held accountable for their impact on the environment, how they treat their stakeholders, not just the profit. The SEC is coming out with its climate risk disclosure rules so shortly, etc. But then you also have some activists and lawmakers who are pushing back politically. They're seeing it as a profitability versus the planet argument, which is a false dichotomy in my view, and I think in your view. But how do you, if you were counseling, and maybe you are, leaders in the US or anywhere that are dealing with, the anti-ESG people, what would you say back to them? How would you counsel them on how to deal with that, to just move on?
So this was kind of the point that I was trying to make you on. So first, I serve leaders on a mission, which are the pioneers, leaders of the world, I believe, in some of the most important sectors to make the shift happen. So I think that they wouldn't choose me if they're anti-ESG, and I wouldn't choose them.
I understand, but we have to, like, what would you say if they did, or somebody said, what would you say?
Yeah. So if I have somebody that stands for that, I would really probably say a couple things. One is that, as I just told you, I believe that whatever type of business you're in, whatever, sector you're in, this is coming. So you have a chance to either wait for the moment to happen, where you will have to be reactive and it's going to be challenging, or you can decide to take your own path to really shape and build your own journey for positive impact. And I think it's a lesson of life more than just shifting business as a force for good. It's about whether you want to take a leadership role in your life with your business, or whether you wait for it to come. That's a choice.
Oh, I love that. No, it's true. It's coming. So either you can get on with it and seize the opportunities that are here now as a leader, and that's what leadership is, or you can be forced into it later. So I totally get that. So before I let you go, though I could talk to you for hours on end, I like to give career advice to mid-career women. And I think about it as a woman who is, say, 10, 15 years of experience, closer to 15 probably, who has an education, has an understanding of what she's good at, and what she wants to do, and she wants to make a difference. She's ambitious. She wants to make money. She wants to advance and make a difference. What advice would you give to her?
I think this is probably the most crucial question. I think that I think it's not one advice, but it's a flow, but I'm going to give you some elements that did really mean a lot to me. One is that you need to listen to your inner voice. Sometimes it may feel super scary. That's the reality a lot of times. But the reality is that the only way to thrive is to listen to your inner voice. The second thing is that it's okay to be ambitious. I think it's one of the critical value that leadership needs, to be ambitious, because we need to really reinvent the way we do business. So this will not happen without ambitious leaders. So that's the second thing. I believe that, in fact, have the courage have the courage, which is courage for me is the fortitude, is the strength of heart that matters in challenging situation, right? That enables you to take a decision. And whatever, there are plenty forms of courage. So there could be the courage to think big, to be super bold and willing to change the world. It could be the courage to act, to take the first step that you're really scared of, but it's okay. Or the courage to say, okay, to let go. This is the most challenging one for me. It's very tough for me to let go. So it's have the courage and go for courage. It's the, enable your courage to fly, really. And the last one, but not least, is that this cannot happen alone. Behind every successful woman, there is a tribe who has her back, because it's challenging, right, to go for and change the world. So I think it's important to choose your tribe.
Oh, I love that. And thank you for being part of my tribe. Absolutely. Oh, that's brilliant. No, you're absolutely right, because there's so much in there. Yeah. And sometimes it's just the courage to speak up. It's the courage to have your voice be heard. It's the courage in a board meeting to say, well, wait a second, I don't, you're all going this way, but can I just kind of be a fly in the ointment here for a minute? I always find that when I do that, when I speak up like that, whether it's raising a question or saying, what about, can I raise another way of looking at it? I always, always, always find that there's somebody else in the room who is either having the same thought, wishes that they were asking the question, or wants to know the same thing. And they always come up to me afterwards and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. So the only thing I want to add to what you said so beautifully is it's courage, but the reality is you're not alone, because there are people in the room, literally or figuratively, who agree with you and want to support that position. And so you actually have them as part of your tribe too. You just don't know them yet. Right? Yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for joining me today. Any final thoughts before I let you get back to your evening as it is now in Paris?
Well, maybe a final thought is that I would really encourage the people that are listening to us to embrace the change that we need in the world. We have actually 10 years, right, to make this happen. And I would like to. I love the author Saint-Exupéry. It's a French author who wrote The Little Prince, and I want to quote him, which is, "We don't inherit the earth from our parents; we borrow it from our children." And myself, I want to be able in 10 years from now to be part of the people that will be able to look into their kids' eyes in 10 years from now and say that I've done everything I could at a time that it really mattered.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. And we all want to be able to do that, right? To look into the eyes of young people and say, we did everything that we could. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today on Electric Ladies Podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And you're so bright and insightful. And I love the way you tie things together so beautifully and with tremendous impact. And thank you for the work that you're doing every day.
I feel so grateful to you, Johan, for having my voice heard. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Isabelle Grosmaitre of Goodness and Company, or Goodness and Co. So what do you think will truly engage companies and organizations to expedite addressing climate change and get to carbon zero? Post it to us on Twitter or Threads at Joan Michelson and send us any questions there as well. And you may win a complimentary consulting or coaching session with me. And please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our talented, amazing guests like Isabelle, our articles, career advice, and events. So maybe you can come find us in Paris when we're there next. And you can subscribe on electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.